Welcome to Modern Mythology, a podcast that explores the intersections of storytelling and system. In every episode, we will explore some facet of how RPGs function as modern myths, providing a shared canvas for creativity and the collaborative discovery of new worlds.
We've come to a milestone, right? We've gotten through, at this stage, 8, 9 episodes. We talked about a bunch of games, and
there's always more that you want to cover.
There's always more. There's no point in time where we're going to be like, it's funny, we kind of started this, actually, Mark and you and I were talking about this and saying, this was originally going to be a Halloween episode.
This was going to be a Halloween episode.
Yeah.
and that's where this kind of all started, and with horror. And we got to about 4.5 games. We had probably a half dozen on our list, right?
Yeah. But if we're just doing, we wanted to do a year of horror games. We stuck with it, so yeah.
So we have a lot more in the future to talk about. There's also going to be some pieces that we're going to bring into other genres, right? Because there's kind of a cross there.
Sure.
Like when we talk about cyberpunk, I'd like to talk about Cthulhu Punk.
Mm-hmm.
And some aspects of old school Cyberpunk 2020 that we sometimes bring in kind of horror.
And also the term I've been using, mythpunk, which actually winds up being kind of appropriate for some cyberpunk games that have been coming out lately. So.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah, there's definitely, for Otherscape, Metro Otherscape, there's definitely elements of horror. It's like spikes of horror, which I think is my sweet spot whenever I'm running things. I always want like a little bit of creep, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be the most swashbuckly thing, out there, but then, an episode, I like looking at some of these series. You know how series, they always have like the musical series, or like, isn't there a trope in soap operas that that the end is coming when like people start getting possessed by demons?
Yeah.
Right. So, we're starting with that stuff.
Right. Yeah. As per usual.
So we have, what we wanted to do is kind of wrap up horror. Again, this is not going to be the end all of be all. This is, we'll have a lot more to talk about down the line. We have a list, a laundry list of things that we want to chat about in this round.
We'll circle back to it.
For sure. We'll come back, particularly when you're talking about science fiction, if themes like Coriolis or Aliens pops up. Mothership. Yeah, for sure. And that's rare. That's a great series.
Yeah.
The horror theme will pop back. So if you're enjoying it, keep listening. Yeah. We'll keep hitting on it.
But there were a couple games that we wanted to give some honorable mentions. Again, I don't know that we will get to them, but I know they've kind of taken some front and center, some attention lately, and I very much hope that we can in the future talk about some of these games, what they do that you can kind of bring into your game that will like kind of punch up the heart.
Sure. Yeah. Oftentimes you can pull elements of systems out and, repurpose them that way.
Right.
So, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a purist in that way.
And by and large, we are talking about this category of games that was termed probably a decade and a half ago story games. And these are games that I will tell you guys, there is a game that we're going to play. We have to, because it literally changed the way I think about games. And you both have to experience it. It's called My Life with Master.
I've heard of it before.
It is an absolutely amazing role-playing game. It is a short-form game. You're generally only playing a episode. There's no experience or anything to that effect. In fact, the structure, it's about minions of a traditional Gothic villain. right? Dracula, Frankenstein's monster.
Okay, so you're playing Renfield, basically.
Absolutely, you're playing Renfield, right? Not to be confused with Annalise, which is telling the story of vampires through the victims of the vampires. Another amazing game.
That's interesting.
And then, of course, Tim Hutchinson's 1,000 Years as a Vampire, which is a solo game that we'll probably talk about when we talk about solo games. But there are two games that were definitely on our list that we just didn't get to. Right? And that is Kult, Divinity Lost, and Unknown Armies. Now, before we start, my suggestion to our one listener is, hi Keenan, is to check out I did a horror wrap-up video about these two games and just a comparison to probably the most iconic horror game out there, which is Call of Cthulhu. Again, there's nothing wrong with a traditional approach to role-playing. There's nothing wrong with Call of Cthulhu. It was produced in 1981.
Oh,
boy,
wow.
That makes me fun.
I know it was in the 80s, but I didn't realize it was 81.
1981. And at the time was a really novel approach of thinking about sanity, thinking about you're not playing these heroes, you know? And that's really, and of course, everybody, like Lovecraftian horror was a divergence from what we saw in horror in fiction and so on and so forth. It became very, very popular in the 80s.
When you say divergence, what do you mean divergence?
In other words, like the traditional sense of horror was basically like Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, right? Like you had this sense of like Salem's Lot and Children of the Corn, and that's
right. And that was just starting to come out around then too, right?
What's that?
Like Stephen King stuff was like what 70s,
70s, yeah. And that was all. That's what people thought of when they thought of horror. Lovecraft is existential horror. Lovecraft is about the realization that you are much, much smaller, right? And even a lot of those traditional horror tropes had everything to do with, at the end, someone got away.
Right.
They may not be unscathed. They may be crazy. They may have a parasite, but they got away.
They might be the only one who can see the monster.
Right. Exactly. And they still had like fun twists. Lovecraft was all about this universe is unknowable. We are insignificant. We are just barely bugs under the old gods, eye. There are no good choices. And what do you do in the face of there are no good choices right now? So that's what I mean about a real divergence theme, right? And you don't have the heroes, right? Old horror, at the end, you put a stake through the vampire, right? That was definitely horror. Interestingly enough, some of the seminal horror films, like The Thing, has an ambiguous ending for that reason, right? And 100%, by the way, The Thing is Lovecraftian horror, right? Like we're fighting it. We're plucky heroes, But when it really comes down to it, we don't really know what's going on. So.
Yeah. So, like, what tools would you say Unknown Armies has that kind of offers to people? Just start with that one, I guess.
So, I think probably the main thing that Unknown Armies gives us is two things. First off, is an approach that says we don't need to think about this linearly, right? In a narrative sense, you have a structure that says, what are the themes going on? What is it that is really at risk? So you might say, we're in a social situation, so you need to play the part you need to explore between how social you're being or how protected, I think it's like connection and struggle, right? So it's like, I'm good at struggling, right? And if I want to be good at struggling, because that's what horror situations kind of approach. And if I'm gonna muscle through this, then I want to have what's called a hardened gauge in the shock gauges. But the people who are good at that struggle, the people who have that grit, are terrible at connecting with other people, right? Which is that
it's
really
like it's a zero sum continuum, which is really, I think, interesting, because it's like you literally can't be good at both at the same time,
right?
You know?
And it's forcing it. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm sure there's plenty of people that are good at both. I'm sure there's plenty of people who have high fitness and are really good at dodging, right? But you have to put yourself into the mindset, and I think that's probably the most important piece of Unknown Armies, is saying, this is the game we're playing. We're going to play under this rule set. And this is the kind of story that rule set is going to give you.
Yeah, give me an example, though. So, like, give me a concrete example, so that, like, how an Unknown Armies game plays and how that might differ from a more traditional rule set.
That's excellent. So let's look at the helplessness shock gauge. And helplessness goes from fitness to dodge. And so at the top of the end, you have a fitness score of 60, right? So that means 60% of the time, you're going to be able to do whatever fitnessy thing you're going to do. And if you think about it, you're not helpless, right? You're fit as a fiddle, you get lots of sleep, you eat well, right? All of those sort of traditional things that we put towards fitness, right? You have time to go to the gym, right? And so when it comes down to it, you're going to be pretty good at meeting these stressful situations, right? However, the more that you fail at those stressful situations, the times when it really matters that your fitness didn't mean a hill of beans, your fitness starts to go down.
Okay.
Because you're starting to worry. You're sleeping less. You're not able to get in those 3 square meals. Right. And what happens is, as you move down the track from an open gauge to a hardened gauge, where now you imagine at the other end of the spectrum is that guy in a trench coat, like, in the middle of this homeless, village, where, he's just shivering and focused on the horrors and the evils in this world. He's going to be very good at escaping. Right. He's going to be very good at getting out of tricky physical situations.
I only played Unknown Armies a couple times, so it might be, but the way I remember thinking about it was not necessarily like your actual fitness or ability to dodge, but more like your psychological frame of mind, in terms of like, where you're like, I'm fine charging at this problem. I'm not going to be hurt. Versus like, I've been hurt before. I'm going to try to avoid those problems.
Right. Absolutely.
Because I had a character who in my head was like, I can't think of them being bad at dodging and being bad at physical skills at the same time. So it's like, what if I think about it more in terms of psychological, trying to put myself to the frame of mind for the character? Because I was still used to games where you have stats that represent your ability to do things, and it was kind of hard for me to wrap my head around it that way. And when I thought about it as frame of mind, it became a lot easier to grasp that. So maybe that's useful for people.
At 100%. And that's, but it's all about those shock gauges are all about stressful situations and how we're going to deal with stressful situations. Do we want to deal with it physically? Do we want to deal with it socially? Do we want to deal with it mentally? Notice things. Do we want to connect with other human beings? Or how much does connecting with other human beings keep us away, make us vulnerable? Right? Yep. So you go from connect to struggle, kind of deal. The second thing that Unknown Armies does that is important but not unique is that it has an objective system. So the group and the player, the group has an objective and the player has an objective. And those objectives have a percentage associated with them.
Okay.
Where you're driving, and every time you succeed at a roll, it whittles away to or increases your objective to get to 100%.
Okay.
And so the goal is to get to 100% on your objective.
Okay.
And that's what you're making all of these rolls to try to accomplish.
So what's a group objective and what is a character objective and how does that relate? Does that play out in the story?
This is actually one of the interesting things I think about it is that everything is objective based, and its advancement system is kind of objective based, because let's say you don't see being a soldier as being useful, and you see all of these magical adepts and crazy wizards and tentacle creatures out in the world. I need to learn more about those, right? And so what you might do is say, I'm going to switch gears and work more away from soldier and more towards monster hunter. Well, that's something that first off you talk to your the group about, because this is a combined storytelling that we're all telling, right? And if everybody says, yeah, that totally makes sense, then you start a new objective at 50%.
Okay.
And then now your story is about becoming a monster hunter. Going from soldier to monster hunter. If you think about it, that's such a compelling story, right? And like things that we don't, think about. If you look at Cypher, and one of Cypher's character arcs is giving birth, and this idea that that's probably not a story that most role-playing groups would think about exploring, but just the idea of the step-by-step process of I'm pregnant, right? More interestingly, now think about this. So we know, right? Biology, that's a 9-month process, right? And holy shit, is it triggery if that objective fails? We're not even going to think about that, what's going on there, right? That's definitely turning the adult level up to your games. But think about this. Think about the idea that your dwarven battle master, right, gets impregnated by a demon, and this is your new character arc now. Of I want to play out this idea of what happens, like when I give birth and I have this son. It's fiction. It's fantasy. We don't care about the biology behind it.
Is it always player driven?
Yes, always player driven. Now, I do play with some of that stuff where sometimes you can be forced into an arc, but you can always fail that arc too.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you can always change it.
And like 50% is basically being in the middle of the continuum is basically what they're...
Yeah, that's all it is. That's all it is.
That's cool.
You have some to lose. That's really what it's like. Because once you get your objective down a certain point, you're just like, okay, I should probably...
Yeah, you lost it.
What time... place does Insane Armies take place?
So Unknown Armies Unknown Armies is actually a contemporary game.
So actually I was going to say there's kind of the T2 example, right? Linda Hamilton having to deal with the child.
I'm bringing John Connor into the world,
right?
Yeah.
Into an apocalyptic future, which is pretty terrible.
Absolutely.
And probably could do a T2 Unknown Armies.
100%.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, right? We could see her, like when you're faced with the visions of a nuclear apocalypse, what does that do to her?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And then she's simultaneously trying to become a warrior, but also be a mother.
Right. That's right. And raising a child is actually the next, is another arc that you could take, right? Yeah. And that's, just really fascinating. So I think those two things really set Unknown Armies about. It's also a very alien way to approach games.
Well, that's my sense. So how do you approach games with that, like as a GM?
The only thing I can say is don't play it once.
I've done it twice, but that's basically played it once.
Yeah, I would say play it a couple times, get a group that's willing to go through 3 to 6 sessions, get it under your belt, because I think you'll really think about your games differently.
Yeah.
Then in terms of like porting that over, really what you're thinking of is, of course, we haven't talked about them yet, but objectives, beliefs, goals. These are so critical in RPGs that certain games just ignore entirely. And then, but also this, you can always insert into a system some little fun gauge mechanic, you know?
Sure.
And like think.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a time when I've ever run an RPG where I haven't had motivations and basically drive towards in a way as some sort of system in it, even if I had to add it to the system. Because what's my motivation in the scene is such a fundamental thing for acting, obviously, but also just for like a character. Like otherwise it's like, what are they doing there?
And also like systematizing these things I think are really critical. Like look at our Otherscape game, and we said in the beginning that this group was a bunch of like struggling people monetarily, but Otherscape doesn't have a system in place to do that. So I talked to a bunch of people on the Discord and came up with this. They came up with this idea of, which is very easy, to have tags that are going from statuses that are going from poor at a -3 all the way up to wealthy at a +3.
Yeah.
So now you have these steps. Now players can look at a systematic way to engage with this. So that's Unknown Armies. And Unknown Armies, interestingly enough, is it turned up, I think, the horror from its original version. Its original version was back in 1998, and that was a much more traditional approach. But then the magic was weird, like because their magic, you're doing crazy stuff. It's much more of a shamanic approach to magic, where you're cutting yourself or you're, just doing various things. Well, in order for this effect to go off, I have to be in an orgy, that kind of stuff. Right. But this time, I feel like they definitely turned up the horror a little bit.
Okay.
But it really is much more of a mage. Like it's more like supernatural than it is horror. You know what I mean? Like a game that's like about supernatural exploration instead of site exploration, right? Like most dungeons are. You're talking about exploration of a new world. And the new world being the world of magic, the world of creepiness,
the world of the occult.
The world of the occult.
Okay, yeah. I'm digging that.
And then the second one was Kult. Was Kult Divinity Lost.
That is a beautiful book.
I love the book.
It is a beautiful book. It is a beautiful book. Again, very adult. You definitely, when you kickstarted that, when I kickstarted that, you definitely had to choose whether or not you wanted the rated R version or not.
Oh, that's interesting. Didn't know it was an option.
Because people are weird about nipples. But now Kult is much more about, it's a horror game, hardcore horror game. Is much more about revealing the true nature of reality, which is a shit show. Okay? That's really much more.
But actually, though.
Yeah. Right. Kult looks at stuff like angels much more like Jamie and I look at angels.
Sure. A kind of like dark Gnostic,
right.
Or like, be not afraid, but actually be afraid.
Right. I think it's an interesting piece. This is not necessarily religious, but thematic. Is an interesting understanding of angels, biblically speaking, because a lot of people do not get, and I know you do, that every time an angel shows up in the Bible, he says, be not afraid. So that tells me there was something to be afraid about. So this would probably be a great place to put in the ad.
Do you want to know what the fallen are, little one? In a sense, they are angels, but not the angels your mom imagines she prays to. Brass trumpets picnicking in the clouds. In their true essence, they are great swirling engines of wing and blood, fiery eyes that peer around the corners between worlds. Dark, radiant things conjured from fresh battlefields. A Frankenstein's Valkyrie, forever crashing to Midgard. What grief demands their hate, what vast cannibal hunger.
Welcome to the Fallen Cycle. This is a universe full of secrets, waiting for those brave or foolhardy enough to seek them out. Discover more about the myth-punk Fallen Cycle universe at fallencycle.com.
But in any case, so you have this infrastructure of these horrific villains in Kult. And then back in 1998, it was around that time when this originally, now these Kult is all, I don't want to butcher which country, but it's Northern European. It's either like Sweden or Norway, I forget. I apologize. And it's actually, the new version is produced by a whole new set of people, which is very interesting.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Greg Stolze and John Tynes were the people who originally made Unknown Armies back in the 90s. And that they are also the lead designers and writers of Unknown Armies, the new Unknown Armies, the one we just talked about. Really amazing group. If you look at that plate and see everybody involved in that, they're just an amazing group of people who are all like, Forge story game aficionados. So like they knew what they were approaching. Kult. It's a new group of people. I am sure they are luminaries in their own right. I'm not familiar with that group. And I'm hoping we can get at some point in time one of them. We run in the same circles, so I'm hoping maybe we can get her
That'd be awesome.
to be involved in a game or run a game. We'll see. But in any case, now Kult actually went the route of Powered by the Apocalypse, right? And so it has with it its own set of limitations in terms of like how people think about running RPGs.
Right. So you want to highlight, similar with Unknown Armies, like the basic systems. I haven't played Kult, and I read the book. I think it might have been the first edition. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Which, if you look at it, is a very traditional game. The original Kult just had skills, just had stats, just, you know what I mean? One of just a little minor fun bit about Kult. In the original game, you had an advantage and disadvantage system. And there was an advantage. One of the higher level advantages was called something like aware. And the description basically is like, you know what's really going on, you have seen beyond the veil, and so on and so forth. At the bottom end of the spectrum, you have one of the more crippling disadvantages called like seen too much, and the description is exactly the same. So I thought that was always really funny. But Powered by the Apocalypse games, Vincent Baker did originally Apocalypse World, and then there have been countless number of spin-offs. Probably the most famous of which I would think was Dungeon World at this point. As a general rule, if I have a choice and I'm going to play D&D, I'm going to play Dungeon World, which is like a direct thematic mapping to D&D, only using the, and it's
different
not
mentality. Yeah.
But basically what you're looking at is a 2d6 curve where if you roll 6 or under, you fail. 7 to 9 is a mixed success. You get what you want, but either at less or the GM gets to give you a consequence. And then 10 or above, you just get what you want.
Yeah.
GM never rolls, right? The GM never rolls. GM, so for instance, let's use fantasy as an example. If you are fighting a goblin, right? You're fighting a goblin. Now you have either you have the pace or the goblin has the pace. If you have the action, right? There's always the implicit, because we're fighting, the implicit threat is I'm gonna slice at you with my axe. I roll. If I succeed, then I do damage. If I fail, then the goblin does damage. That's how the goblin. The GM doesn't roll to hit.
Right. That's cool. Yep.
Conceptually, if you do a mixed success, we both do damage. Right.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. Consequently, though, I could decide on a mixed success that I want to do damage to the goblin, but the GM gets to decide what the goblin does to me. Maybe the goblin breaks my sword. You know what I mean? Or something more, or something crazy, whatever the case is. But and it's so loose and open, and it's really hard sometimes to kind of wrap your head around. I know we've been dealing with that with Otherscape, because Otherscape also uses kind of a version of Powered by the Apocalypse.
Right, like 2d6, and it's all tag based.
Right, it's all right.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. Probably we talk about Cyberpunk. But yeah, so now Kult first off uses 2d10. So it has the same curve, but it does allow you a little more leeway in terms of the pluses and minuses. Right? So 2d6, you're at 2 to 12. And then, so a +3 means a lot. And usually like +3, we found with Otherscape, like +6 is a lot.
Right.
And it's, you're basically almost getting rid of failure at that point. So this allows a little bit more leeway in terms of negatives and positives, where you have more stuff that allows you to fall into the curve.
Yeah, but I do like the idea that, the players roll the die and that negative is that somebody else gets the wound or something goes really, really wrong. That's I don't like that.
Yeah. And I actually incorporate this a lot of times even into more traditional games. I almost always have some sort of partial system.
Mixed success
always. And then lately, it's actually not terribly difficult to do that, to have player facing games in something that is designed to be one way. Because if you look at something like Armor Class, remember that they add that 10 points. Like if you're going to develop Armor Class, you start with 10 points. Right. Then you say you're going to add your mods. Well, that 10 points is that roll, right? So it actually allows you, instead of saying my armor is this effective, you could conceivably say, the GM says, well, you're up against a modifier based on the opponent's attack. And now that die roll is replacing just the 10. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? So I can instill a player-facing role system really pretty darn easily, where now it's about them rolling defense. So one thing I didn't mention is, instead of a player driving the idea of, I want to hit the goblin, it may be where I, as a GM, am pushing against you and saying, you're being rushed by an ogre. Now, you're not on the offensive. Now you have to figure out how to get the hell out of dodge. Right? And so you're dodging, you're defending, you're hiding, whatever the case is. That becomes more of a defensive role, where again, getting away. Now, one of you could say that the best defense is a good offense, right? You could say, I'm going to, try to sweep the ogre's feet under him, drop
my feet and stab with my spear.
And if you succeed at your roll, damage is a perfectly appropriate thing to do.
But if you don't, you may not wake up the next morning.
Right. So Kult is using that. Now, if we saw Call of Cthulhu has sanity, right? Probably one of the most story-driven mechanics up to that point in any game, right? That we really saw up to 1981, right? And at this point, keep in mind that D&D itself is only about 5 years old, 6 years old, right? And is, of course, most of gaming at this point is derived off of miniatures games. It's just board games. So, to have something like the basic role play system is a departure, is a big push towards telling some kind of story, right? But now, if you look at something like Kult, so Kult has its own thing. It's called stability. But you have this idea that for instance, there is a move, there's a thing that players can do called like toughing it out, keeping it together. That's what it's called, keeping it together. So it's like now this Cthulhian monster comes out, you know, like that scene in Beetlejuice where he like shows what he really looks like,
right,
you know?
Exactly.
And then James, he's, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to steel myself and like dig into all of the happy childhood memories I can possibly muster, to not lose my shit. All right. Keeping it together.
Chronicles of Darkness is the breaking point role.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which we saw when we did Chronicles of Darkness. Right. So, and then at that point, if you fail or if you get a mixed success, then your stability goes down.
Okay.
And stability is one of the passive actions. It's a stat, right? Like sanity is definitely a stat, right?
So is sanity in Kult too?
In Kult.
But they have they have stability, and that's the world, like how stable they've seen the other side,
Exactly.
and if they lose their stability, they see it all.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's deep.
And the idea, I mean, I imagine the idea is that it factors into your role playing too, in terms of, you know, like how you play the character, if their stability is low versus being high.
Right. Absolutely. You know, it's always fiction first, right? So you describe what you're doing, and then that at point in time sometimes it becomes like this weird negotiation between like trying to pick the appropriate skill. Specifically, the GM should be the one saying, this is the move that we're making. This is what we're doing.
Yeah. Usually whenever it gets confusing, it's kind of like, what are you trying to do? Right. As a storyteller, ask him that. And then,
Well, in effort to keep the game straight, you did use the term goblin. So what is like the minion? What is the like adversary typically in Kult?
So I mentioned that you have these sort of like horrific angelic villains, right? They're called lectors.
Lectors.
The big bad is called the Demogorgon.
of course.
And again, they're definitely like these Gnostic elemental forces, right? It's more like Hellraiser.
Yeah.
Right. There's these creatures now. Hellraiser, they're from hell, right? But these are not necessarily just corruptive forces, but they're like fighting against each other for power. You know. But then you'll have varying kinds of creatures that are all just as horrific, right? Then they all have some sort of passion. They all have some sort of means that they're trying to feed off of reality. So one of the scenarios is a family, and the father's kind of acting weird, and you're literally just playing like the wife and the two kids. And trying to figure this out until eventually everything gets peeled away and you realize that the father has actually been taken over by this creature that is feeding over the chaos within the family. And so
that's an
over its poverty, over the violence, over, you know, that kind of
Great
stuff.
Promise.
And so you really, while they really are taking these ideas, right, and turning the idea of horror onto its head, because now you're turning real life trauma into something that can be fought. Right. Something that now you're conceptualizing in a way that is a little less relatable and a little less triggering. You know?
Yeah. Well, you can really see how you amp up the creep factor.
Right.
I mean, in a family dynamic situation, I'm just walking by the mirror and seeing this, and then popping back, and the mirror just being a reflection of it.
Right. And part of that can be like, well, what do you do? Like, you know what I mean? So that's
for sure.
That's the point. Like, do you try to keep it together? Do you break the mirror? Do you know, what do you do to
what if the mirror is the way
this?
they watch you?
Right. Right. Now we're getting to the visible sun. Mirrors are viruses.
Yeah.
So that is Kult. Absolutely beautiful book. Check out the YouTube channel to just look at some of those visuals. It's just bound. Now that was I have the Kickstarter version. I don't know how different that is from the Modiphius version. So Modiphius actually owns Kult now and are running was. I haven't looked at that. I can't imagine it's changed, but it's probably just not as. But yeah, so again, these are. Anybody have any questions about?
Yeah, so I guess my question would be: so if I was, if somebody's listening to us and they're saying, "Wow, this sounds like really two great choices," I mean, yeah, I can go around and look on YouTube, which is a great idea. Take a look at these products a little bit closer. But what do you think distinguishes them? Like, what do you think is a good reason to choose one over the other?
That's a good question. I think that first off, I want to say, unlike a lot of channels, I'm not necessarily trying to convince people to buy or get into a particular game. I do suggest people try them all, right? And I don't mind saying I have.
But you're a resident expert when it comes to gaming in that way.
I don't know. I just know that I spent a lot of my life gaming. Yeah. So what I will say is, first off, there's a lot of people who are maybe dissatisfied with the game they are playing, right? And there are a lot of great options to turn to. These two games, and probably why they didn't make it at the front of the list, are a lot more obscure in terms of the type of game. First off, both of these games, Unknown Armies could be a long form game, right? All three of these games, at some point in time, we're definitely going to have a troop style conversation.
Right.
Because all these games benefit from having a stable of characters, because you're talking about characters who are going to go bonkers, right? That they're not going to be playable characters at some point.
Do they have like a built-in device for a troop for your troop, like where it's like, like where, like, I mean, in like a cyberpunk game, be like, you're freelancers, or you're, a found family, or you're whatever it is, like a sort of theme?
Not really.
Okay.
And that, again, when we talk about troop style, we'll talk about some of the games that do have mechanisms for this. Yeah. But none of these have particular mechanisms other than, sometimes you may play characters that are not even together. Right. In some of these games, right? Where you're just playing with vignettes, which seems to be, from the community that I've seen, seems to be the way a lot of people play Kult, is they'll be like, here's the situation, go. And you just play that situation, and, most of us who have played Call of Cthulhu know that most of the characters do not make it, or certainly don't make it with their insanity intact. And you need a way to either say, hand wave it and be like, everybody's fine next session, or we're playing somebody else, right? Yeah. So, but we'll talk about that then. So they are short form games, which is kind of funny because Kult's an expensive game.
I was going to say, it's full color, a beautiful book. It doesn't look like something that you do like it's not a one hit investment.
Right. So you really want to play that game in order to buy it. And again, Modifius might have a PDF version, that kind of stuff. As far as Powered by the Apocalypse games go, there's probably a lot of other opportunities to play Powered by the Apocalypse games to get a sense of what that looks like. Kult is good if that's the kind of game you want to run. If you want to run Reality Reveals Itself, right? Quite honestly, so the difference there being Reality Reveals Itself as compared to these things are in actual reality.
Yep.
Right? So Unknown Armies is saying reality exists now. By the way, magic exists too. Kult is saying everything you're looking at is not real. This is a prison. It's like the Matrix. And woe if you actually ever see the reality. So the answer to your question of like, if you're going to play one of those games, which one should you play? If you're going to invest in those games, you have to be interested in playing those games. If in Unknown Armies, you have to be interested in telling stories about crazy magicians, about street shamans, about sex cult leaders. that has to be what you're interested in playing and telling, then that's what you should go towards. If you want to do a reveal, if you want to engage in the setting of Kult, that's why you turn to Kult.
Right.
You know?
Sure. Good advice.
Quite honestly, I think of the games, I'm actually going to turn this question around to you guys.
Sure.
So we've talked about 4 games. You guys have played 4 games now. Blades in the Dark, Don't Rest Your Head, Whispering Vault, and and Chronicles of Darkness.
Right.
Aside from the fact that Jamie runs a Chronicles of Darkness game now, of these, I'm going to say 6 games that we've looked at, which ones do you think you would be most interested in turning to in telling horror stories?
So what got me into doing this podcast in the first place is basically playing more systems and seeing what I like and don't like about this different systems that I can pull into other systems, you know?
Yeah.
So yes, Chronicles of Darkness is kind of one of my defaults just because I kind of know it. But I was surprised by how much I enjoyed Whispering Vault. I think just based on like kind of what I knew about it beforehand and then playing it, I was kind of like, how does this work where it's reversed, where, you know, you kind of know everything in advance. I think you follow the ritual, which we kind of did. I mean, I'm sure, you know, if we're running kind of like more of a story based and less of an exploratory session, it would be a little different. But, I really like that element of it, of the ritualization and of calling out scenes with the chimes and all that sort of thing. It really helped create a pace. And I think a lot of systems, even systems that don't have a way of calling out a scene, could probably benefit from that sort of thing to help delineate, because you can get into those sort of churns where you have sort of side conversations or characters kind of go off in a sort of direction and you lose cogency, you lose direction, you know, and it's really can be helpful to have that thing to kind of bring it back. And in a horror game in particular, I think that's especially true in a way, because if you don't have that central focus, you can very easily turn into like the, you know, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, or like, you know, version, or like Always Sunny in Ravenloft or whatever, you know, like where that kind of happens with an RPG party when you open it up.
And we've been talking about like proactive versus reactive, right? So that becomes very important in understanding and driving the game forward, because you can have players who would turtle. Right. And so if you think about it, a lot of times you have like horror protagonists who they survive because they hid. Right. and that doesn't make for a great game. All right, you hide. There we go. We're done. Right. Yeah. So instead of the GM using caveat and saying, I found you. Right. Now it's like you have something to do and the world grinds forward. That's part of the idea of like the Powered by the Apocalypse threats. You know, is they have something called hit clocks in Powered by the Apocalypse. And the idea is that I'm going to make a threat and then I'm going to move that threat forward every time you don't deal with it. That's it. Yeah, you know, just some good GMs, I'll be honest, will have that fucking hit clock up on the wall. Yeah. You know, and just you watch it step forward. You're like, crap. Yeah. You know, the Nazis continue to get the Ark of the Covenant. You know, the orcs continue to march on Helm's Deep. Like, if you don't do stuff, the world is fucked. Like, it sets consequences, and that's what that Whispering. I love Whispering Vault. No one would have to twist my arm to run a Whispering Vault.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the systems I've been pulling is this is from Blades in the Dark, but the clock, where you have like a number of successes like on a wheel that you check in, and I've been using that. I started using that in Chronicles of Darkness just because like there's certain tasks where it's like, oh, you need 10 successes for this long-term thing, your project or whatever. But then I realized, well, there's a lot of resisted rolls too. So what if like you have forces who are kind of trying to push in one direction on that wheel, and then the players trying to push in the other direction on the wheel. Really neat. And that was a way to track it. You know, and I've been doing that a little bit too, and that's been really useful. That's
very exciting. Yeah.
So I feel like the two experiences or two games that really kind of rocked me, which was one because it was the initial game that we played, and it was just a great start to the process, was Blades in the Dark. I absolutely love the theme. I thought the city and being close in the city and the dreariness around the city and the mushrooms and the fungi being the light to set the tone for the entire game. And I thought that the system was really neat. And I thought how your character maneuvered through that world and could kind of change his role because I remember my character was very aggressive, and then after an encounter, he kind of changed his whole aspect because it was.
We use flashbacks a lot too.
Yeah, the flashbacks. That's
right, because I liked one of the things that happened with your character is like you think that you were kind of a fighter, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting because what ends up happening is as the distraction, you end up being a support role where we see fighters as being much,
Absolutely.
DPS or whatever the case is, being much more of an active role.
Yeah, and I thought it may have been your GMing, but I did think that the way the world came together was really evocative, and I really appreciated Blades in the Dark. And I would say the other one is Don't Rest Your Head. I was talking about that game 2 weeks later. I remember sitting in the car going home, which I think is the whole purpose of these games, is to have that memory of an experience which is still meaningful and still evokes an emotion in you. And thinking there was such creepiness in the game and there were such weird moments in the game. It sort of reminded me of some of my actual dreams. Mm-hmm. And allowed me to connect with it in this space, of experiencing a role playing game, and that to me spoke a lot to me. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's necessarily the easiest game to get people to all sign up and play.
Right.
It's probably not, but it was definitely an experience that I remembered and valued, and even to this day, I have a smile on my face about.
Like Don't Rest Your Head was the dark horse because it's such a dense concept.
Yes.
To like bring it forth, and that was probably the game I ran that I felt like was most Cult of Personality. Like that was me ramping up. But the structure of it does lend itself to horror, which is what we're talking about. So maybe we should put it in the loop.
Right.
So you are basically in the Mad City. All right. What is going on now is your boyfriend, did he fall into the well? Did he in the subway? So he's
and hit his head on
and hit his head.
His head is bleeding out all over the place.
All over,
and it's clear that he's not coming back anytime soon.
All over his tracks. How busy is it? And is it
It was late at night.
Late at night.
Nobody else was around. There was nobody.
Were you guys waiting for a train?
Yeah, we were just fooling around waiting for the train.
Waiting for a train.
And she's not big enough to lift him, so she's just. Right now, she's in fight or flight.
Do you jump down?
No.
You don't jump down?
No. She's worried. She's now looking for cameras to see, like, if she freezes.
You hear a screech?
A screech?
Uh-huh.
Maybe someone's coming?
Uh-huh. You hear a high-pitched whine and a rumbling sound.
His eyes are open, so I don't know. Her thought is, where's his wallet?
Are you going to climb down and get his wallet?
Well, does she have any money?
No.
Then she has to climb down and get his wallet.
All right, sounds good. All right, so this is how the mechanics work. Okay. You're going to get 4 dice pools. Everybody's going to build, when you have a scene like this, you build 4 dice pools. Okay. Now, you have, so blue is discipline, which you start with 3 dice.
Mm-hmm.
White is exhaustion, which I think you start with 1 die. I'll look real quick. Madness, you don't have any madness right now. And I set a difficulty called pain.
Okay.
All right. So what you're trying to do is you are trying to get in there, get his wallet, and hop out, or at least get to safety before the train comes.
Right.
Okay. Is there any element of this where you're trying to do so surreptitiously? No.
This is a mad scramble, trying to get his wallet and then get out of the subway before somebody falls. And she's particularly aware that the train's going to stop and people are going to get off. And then she might be seen.
Well, so that is a worry of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, gotcha. So, you're obviously worried about getting hit by the train, but there is a level of sort of, you don't want to be seen,
right? Kind
of idea. Sounds good. So I'm going to give you a level 5 pain. Okay. All right. 1 die for exhaustion to start. I would say this is pretty crazy response. Do you feel like you're in any way under the influence or anything?
Oh, she might be definitely under the influence, yeah.
So you're gonna start with 1 madness die,
Okay.
1 exhaustion die, 3 discipline, and 5 pain.
Okay.
Now, what you do, you can increase this by 1 if you want, right? You could increase this by 1 to 6.
Okay.
Okay. And what you're doing is you're trying to ascertain, you're trying to develop narrative control. Okay. If your pain is your dominant, I gain narrative control.
Okay.
If these 3 are your dominant, you gain narrative control, but they each, they're mechanical effects and it's how it's going to be adjudicated, right?
Okay.
So if madness dominates, then you have to narrate it in terms of things just got wacky, right? What's going to happen with exhaustion is, like, obviously it means what's dominating is fatigue and things getting run down and apathy, that kind of deal. If discipline narrate, you get what you want.
Right.
Okay. Now, however, there's a catch. You're going to roll all these. Okay. Go ahead and roll all those dice. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put these all together. So you have, for discipline, you have 6, 2, 2. You have 5 for exhaustion, 2 for madness, and then you have 2 4s and a 3 and 2 1s. Now, what this says is that the 6 is the highest. So that means discipline dominates. Okay. And you're looking to roll low, right? So you have 2 successes on 2s.
Lows are successes.
Lows are successes. To determine strength of the pool, find the die in the color showing the highest number. So this dominates, and you're right. So if discipline dominates, things stay under control.
Okay.
You have the option to remove a response check or decrease exhaustion by 1. Decide in advance how you're going to handle narrative control. Some parts of this are easy. You're basically saying, like, what's going to happen, what happens here. So you successfully get down to the bottom there.
Okay, so she grabs his wallet.
Yep.
And then she's going to scramble back up. I mean, if there were these other things, depending upon, I was going to say that if this was the exhaustion, I was going to say her drugs are more influential, or that this one, what's this die called?
Madness die.
Yeah, I would say that, she looks at him and she sees the core and starts to get sick. I think that was my more colorful piece of
Sure. And the nice thing is you kind of ignore this stuff, and it just says, now how many successes are there?
Okay.
What?
She got lucky.
But she got lucky. You jump down, you grab his wallet, and you scramble back up before the train. And it was one of those, like, probably further than your anxiety sort of, got you to. However, he sort of, like, kind of disappears under the train. Like, the train moves, right? And you can't see him.
Okay.
Right? But now people are like, so you just trying to
Flick my hoodie, and I click my hoodie up and exit.
Okay. So you see this guy across the street. What do you do?
We just saw who I've been seeing in my dream dying on the windshield. I probably freeze in place for a moment, staring at him, and then realize I'm staring and turn and run.
You turn and run?
I think so. Yeah. Well, I picked flight also as reaction.
Dominated by flight?
Yeah.
Okay.
With fight at the end. Yeah.
So where are you? What are you?
Probably like a crowded street.
Okay, so you're out in the street.
Yeah.
Are you in, like, the city? Are you,
Yeah. I think so.
Sounds good. I mean, you're, and you see this guy, right? And he's, like, staring right at you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, let's see here. So you're at a 4-way intersection.
Okay.
Right? And, like, he's standing at, like, the caddy corner from you. And he's standing there and he's just, like, looking at you, and he's, like, bloody, and it looks like one of his legs.
Oh, he actually looks like he's been hit.
Really messed up, and he's looking at you.
Okay.
And like a bus goes by, and now he's in the close inner corner.
Yeah, I'm definitely right.
Yeah. Right.
Because the first reaction is kind of guilt. I'm like, oh, this is the guy I hurt. And then like he's coming closer. I'm like, oh God.
All right. So what is your goal here? What are you trying to do?
I'm probably trying to get away. I'm just trying to get away from him.
Sounds good.
I thought he's really thinking too much right now. It's kind of like panic is overridden. His rational.
Right. So I think that to get rid of him, we're going to set pain to 4. Okay. But you're admittedly you're in your head, right? Your anxiety's kind of getting tweaked.
Yeah.
Right now, your exhaustion just at 1, and then you have 3 discipline.
Okay.
So go ahead and roll that.
those. Yeah. All right.
So that doesn't look good. So madness is a 6.
Yeah.
Your discipline is 5, 4, and 4. Your exhaustion is 5, and your pain is 5, which is really
If we were playing Blades, it would have been a good roll.
It would have been a really good roll. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this. So first off, madness is dominating.
Yeah.
And is a failure. You don't have any successes on the madness track. You actually have very few successes in general. You only have 2 over here. So madness. When madness dominates, regardless of the outcome, the situation places great psychological or emotional strain on the protagonist. Further, circumstances inevitably become more chaotic. Protagonist may find himself falling victim to the risks he takes. This has the game effect of checking off one of the protagonist's responses. So in this case, you were already running, right? Now, do you have any fight, or do you just have 3 flight?
2 flight and 1 fight.
And 1 fight. So you could decide to turn around and fight. If the response is flight, the protagonist must react and result. If the response is fight, the protagonist must react with action. So basically what happens at this stage is you tick one of those responses. Which one do you want to?
A flight. I think he's panicking.
He's just panicking.
Okay.
But you're trying to run from this guy and you failed. Right? So you failed getting away from him, right? But one of your responses get triggered. So you want to just get away. What does that look like? What you're not getting away, but do you fall? Every hard...
Basically, I kind of run somewhat blindly and like almost run into traffic and kind of like leap out of the way of the traffic that almost hits me, and then find that I'm basically still like staring at him when I like turn around, kind of thing.
Gotcha. So that's the madness, right? It's like where no matter where you go, you run, he's in front of you. You run, he's in front of you.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, Mark. So you flip up your hoodie, and as people are moving around you, and as you see in the corner of your eye, what's your boyfriend wear? Like, what kind of jacket does he have on?
He just has a black t-shirt on, and he's got the black t-shirt on. He's got the rock band on the cover of it, and the or hip hop band on the cover of it, whatever it's done. And then he's got a big brass belt on, and and that's it. Like another thing other than that, it's his hair.
What's with his hair?
Lots of dreads.
Oh, dreads. Awesome. Yeah, you see like a flash of brass go. There's just a little gap between the train and the wall, right? There's a little ladder that goes down onto the tracks. But you see like a flash of brass that goes from the train
to the ladder
across, past the wall.
Okay. Did he survive the thing and I just not know it? Was it just like knocked unconscious? So, I mean, she loves him. She'll go after him.
She'll go after him.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So you get to the edge and you can see him, right? He's gone surprisingly decent distance. You don't think he's really walking well. right? He seems to be sort of like a little herky-jerky, but he's a good ways down.
So I'll pursue after him, and then I'm worried about the train starting up again. Where's the train relative to him? And is he on the tracks? Is he wobbling? Like, is he so?
You
said he's
get
coming well.
Yeah, he's kind of wobbling. You hear a thing over the loudspeaker that says this is the last stop.
Okay. Oh, so he's gonna. Okay. Well, I hopped down the ladder when I.
So you hop down the ladder and you're heading down there, and as you get there, you see that it's really dark down here, right? But it looks like there's, I don't know, bats or something that are sort of like just fluttering around in the tunnel.
Okay.
Particularly around him.
Okay. So I slow down.
Okay.
And I call his name.
Okay. What's his name?
Ray.
Ray. You said Ray? Ray. He doesn't stop.
I'm trying to see if it's real. Like, am I just trying to trick something? Because I am tired. I'm like, been awake for days. So,
Right.
Like, how do you do a perception check? Like, or do I just move closer? I move closer.
You move closer, right? I mean, that's the only way. So you move closer. You turn him around.
Yeah, I try to reach out to him.
So you turn around and you see that there are origami bats that are sort of nestled under his clothing.
Ugh.
And they're like, some of them have like little like paper claws dug into his jacket or into his shirt and into his arm, like, and fluttering around.
All right, I back off.
And they're not doing a good job, but they're trying to like move him down the way.
Wow.
And you're not certain if he's awake or whatever the case is. Like, you turn him around and his jaw is just kind of lolling.
Yeah, I don't know. I step back. That's a little creepy for me.
Do you allow them to just take your boyfriend down the?
I think I'll follow him.
Okay.
Because now I don't know if I'm in a dream or not.
Okay, sounds good. They get to like a little alleyway, right? Like a little archway in the side of the thing. And it's dark in there, but it's actually getting darker and darker and darker the further and further from the station you get. And he goes up a ladder, but they don't go up the ladder. They're like flying and like really struggling to lift him, but like ultimately like lifting him off the ground.
I would try to. I'm wondering if I'm going crazy.
And they like actually drop him at the top, and then attempt. So now instead of him walking, now he's just sort of like hovering like this, and his limbs are kind of at odd angles, and like his body is just sort of like floating down the hall, which disappears for you after a little while.
Okay, so I start to climb up the ladder.
So you climb up the ladder, and you could see down that hallway, you could hear sort of this tinny music, and you see a light coming from a doorway.
And I have no weapons.
Do you?
No. So I climb up top.
Yep.
And I quietly go into the darkness, really towards that light and where he is.
Okay. Are you gonna let them sort of fly into that door?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow. I mean, like.
So yeah, he kind of floats, disappears in the doorway.
So I try to move to the door before it can close.
Sure. It's actually not closing. It's just an open doorway.
So I peek around the corner.
So you actually see at first you see a bunch of children, probably about a little more than a half dozen of them. There is some sort of like vitriola, like playing, very staticky music, kind of upbeat, sort of like 1940s. There's a large sort of steaming printing press. And at the end of the printing press, so you have the front of the printing press, which is in front of you. You could see occasionally like a paper will like pop out and like land. And then, it's going to on the other side of the printing press, it's like this sort of escalating series of ways that the the paper sort of goes through. And at the top, you could see that there's a, looks like a big black sort of rectangular column that matches the size of this sort of escalating stair of coils, right? The boys are, they have like little news caps and they have sort of torn and rugged, like boots and jackets. They seem to be in a good mood that you're getting from them, but there's no sound coming from them. So, and then you could start to see that these bats, right?
Yep.
And apparently once they see your boyfriend, once they see Ray, they start like making like, like they're dancing, whatever the case is. And it starts to sort of like rise. And they're like this little weird paper, origami bats are just struggling to get him up and up and up and up.
You're going to put him in a black bot, aren't they? All right. But
I can't, is he alive? You definitely think he's alive. He's like, you definitely hear a groan out of him.
well, then that changes the dynamics. Okay. Well, then, okay. So, is there a way for me to sneak through where I won't be noticed?
It is a very well-lit room.
Okay.
I mean, it's possible. It's just how high the paint decks are.
Okay. So I'm in the doorway. I'm looking to the right. Is there any caps near there that would make me look more like them?
It's an excellent question. What are you trying to do?
Trying to sneak in.
You're trying to sneak in. You'd like to maybe like...
and I'm trying to read the room to figure out how I can get to a point where I can actually stop them from throwing them into the vat.
That's an excellent question. I would say if you want to do this sneakily, you might be able to sneak past the machine all the way and like squeeze between the machine and the wall.
Okay, I'll try that.
Okay. Sounds good. So, again, you build your discipline of 3.
3, yep. And then
your exhaustion of 1.
Okay, madness.
So this is kind of a crazy scene.
Yep.
So I'm going to say madness probably of 2.
Okay.
And because it's well lit and they're watching this process pretty closely, I'm going to put that at 6.
Okay.
Now, again,
I can push that stuff.
You can increase that die by 1, or you can add as much madness as you want.
But what's the negative to the madness?
Then the scene gets more crazy. The narrative of the outcome becomes more crazy. Also, more dice means the possibility of success, but they'd be crazy successes, right?
Okay.
Now, also, if you ever use either your exhaustion talent or your madness talent, you have to add to those pools.
Okay. I'm going to add 1 to the exhaustion.
Exhaustion. Okay.
I mean, I think she's just angry. She's confused and she's angry because she thought he was dead. She grabbed his wallet. Now she feels bad about that. It's like guilt. Right. I would say it's almost like just being overwhelmed with guilt. And how did she not know he wasn't alive? Right. And so she's questioning her reality.
Sounds good. Let's see what happens.
Actually, probably give another madness die because of that. She's kind of questioning the reality that she's experiencing.
Sounds good. There you go.
We got a 6 on discipline.
You got 600. That's just no 6. Look at that. Jeez.
Yeah.
All right, another and 2 successes. Then discipline.
Yep.
Discipline again. So, once you get to the other side, you can actually see that there's actually a ladder, right? Sort of like an old rusty ladder that climbs this sort of, black corrugated metal box. And as you get up there, you can actually see that it's toothy wheels. In there just as you get to the top, like they pressed.
Okay.
What are you gonna do?
Questions where we go from here because we're at the top of a ladder. That's a straight up ladder, but
just gonna try. So there is a tug. I'm not going to. I could be like, oh well, now you have to fight off but they're struggling to carry an adult male to begin with, So you can shake them and they kind of flutter off, kind of idea. Yep, you maybe throw them over your shoulder or something.
I think we sort of stumble down with me clinging to him as best I can without him falling 30 feet.
It sounds good. All right. So you kind of one arm it, I'm sure you're struggling to get down, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You get to the bottom and the two of you are just sort of like collapsed at the base. All right. You are again desperately trying to get away from this guy.
Uh-huh.
And you a manhole cover, right? Pops up. Probably go down a little side street, looking behind you. There's cars around. Cars are of like all different time periods, but you see like as you're walking by it or running, shuffling by it, a manhole cover hops a little bit. And then you see like a hand push it to the side. And you hear some whispering
from the manhole.
And you see sort of like a head, like a pair of eyes kind of look, and you hear, who is it? All right, hold on. And then after a little while, like a head pops up of someone you recognize.
Okay.
Who is it?
I'm sorry, my first thought was my boss. I'm like, I don't know what the hell they would be doing in a manhole.
It's your boss. There we go. So your boss is like, come on.
Yes, yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing down there?
What are you doing?
I was walking home from work and I saw someone I thought I recognized, but I don't think I did. I think I was just I don't know. But are you in the sewer? What's down there?
Are you trying to get away from him?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Come this way.
All right.
Wow.
Observer. I know.
They like climb, he climbs down and you like look down into the darkness. You see like he looks up every once in a while.
Like, and I imagine like stockbrokers or something. So it's even weirder that his boss is like, coming over the manhole.
Yeah, he's like bald. He'd be like, he's this balding guy. You're not certain what he's wearing. And right now, you really just see him from the head down. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he goes down. And then once he gets down, you can see just sort of like steps away, gets into a tunnel area and kind of steps away from the ladder as you can kind of see him just on the periphery.
As you're going down, like, what's down here? Is this a sewer?
It's a way to escape.
Didn't really answer my question, but all right. You're the boss.
So you get down there and you look and you can see that there's a bunch of people, varying different sizes, and they're all kind of on the periphery of the light, which is very, very dim. And they're wearing kind of like a ramshackle collection of clothing. Nothing is matching, like, in other words, not even their shoes, not like it is garb, like various kinds of clothing that are kind of anachronistic here and again. That's pretty common for the Mad City because there's all these people from different times who, have become awake or hollow.
But I don't really realize yet that I'm like in a different place, right? Like I don't like realize I'm in that setting. Like I think
that's a good question.
I think I was.
You're still a little like okay. The body shape and like the clothes don't fit your boss at all. And what are you gonna do? They're like, oh, here. They're like, come on.
How long have you been down here?
And there's like a number. There's only 12 people down here in this tunnel.
I said, well, first I'll say, how long have you been down here? And I'll also be like, and who are your friends?
He says, like, looks around to them and very awkwardly and is like, yes, we're your friends. We live down here.
I'll like, look at my boss kind of more closely. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, what's my name?
He looks over his shoulder, right? And you see somebody in the back who's like going through some papers, right? It's like, Simon,
done your homework.
No, and then you're like, my boss really don't my name.
I'm gonna kind of play along, but I'm like kind of like keeping a distance from a little bit and getting a little wary of them.
Yeah. What is your focus on? By the way, they're around, like the hallway's not very big. It's probably about maybe just a person size on either side of the ladder. that comes all the way down to the bottom. And, it's dark, so it's hard to tell, but what's your focus on? So you're talking to your boss.
Yeah.
But he's referred to this other person, and there's these people around you.
I'm focused on my boss, but now I'm starting to believe my boss, that he isn't who he says he is. So I'm kind of looking for an exit.
Well, there's up.
Yeah, but I guess I'll question him a little bit more. So where are you trying to lead me?
There's some whispering from a couple of the other people, and this is the man upstairs. My boss wants to talk to you, and they all titter. Like, yes, his boss.
My character's instinct is to turn and run again, but he's gonna kind of like clamp down against that. I can't run forever. And maybe even mutter that under my breath without realizing it, and kind of like, all right, fine, show me your boss. Kind of grimly.
Right. As you're walking, you are getting a little more and more unsettled as you note that the people around you don't have faces per se. They have these like impressions of faces. Some of them are faces, but the faces are kind of a little distorted.
I'm dreaming. I must still be dreaming.
You're just gonna kind of go along with them?
Yeah. I'm kind of like, and like I reach into my pocket, like expecting to find like a pistol or something. I've been carrying around because I'm getting paranoid.
Right.
But it's not there.
It's not there. Well, okay. Why isn't it there? Did you just leave it at home, or maybe
it's because I'm dreaming.
All right. So then it's dark and down here, but then you see an archway of light a little bit away ahead. And they're like, he's in there, your boss says. Your boss is much shorter than normal. Like, he's maybe your height, maybe even a little. Now he's like a good, 4 inches shorter.
I said, why don't you go get him?
He wants to see you.
I look back down the tunnel where it came from.
One of them waves.
I think you should introduce me, I say. I'll come with them.
So they confer, whisper to each other, and sort of is like resigned. He's like, okay. And he walks up and he just peers around the doorway. He doesn't like walk in. He just like looks around.
I'm kind of waiting for him to go in, or at least to, I'm not going to go in first.
And he like goes in, sticks along the wall. You're going to go in?
I'm going to do the same thing as him.
Okay, sounds good. When you look in, you can see that there are a bunch of children dancing. What's your focus on? Are you looking at the room? Are you looking at the children? You're looking at him? The children.
Yeah.
So the children are like dancing. There's some music playing off of Virtuola. And you notice something odd about the children. Their faces and hands seem to have like writing on them.
I'll call out to one of them.
To children?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are you playing?
They all stop and turn and look at you.
Just when I sneak through the other door.
You sort of pass the threshold. There's probably a good 3-foot little mini tunnel, this doorway that went into the room. And you look and you can see a young girl in a hoodie.
Okay.
Sort of crouching next to this giant printing press.
Do I recognize her?
Yes, you do. It's actually from somebody in your group therapy.
Right.
You don't remember her name.
Yeah, I'll kind of be like, hey, remember you like the glazed donuts?
And then the boys point at you and all start running towards you, and you can see that your boss, who's now out in the open, looks like a weird kind of person made of wax. You can see actually in the light that your boss's face is melting just a little bit.
I'm going to try to push him towards them.
And like his features, and he's like trying to wear clothes. kind of idea.
I want to try to push him towards them and kind
Towards
of like
them.
run towards the person I actually recognize.
Okay. Who's like in a corner over near the machine. All right. So you go to, it's only a few steps, right? And he stumbles forward. What's your intent? What are you trying to do here?
Well, I'm trying to pushing him there just firstly to see if he's actually just a statue, but also to try to like slow the kids up a little bit. And then basically, I think it's just like someone I actually recognize who doesn't seem like some sort of weird monster down here. I want to try to get to them, but I don't really have a plan beyond that because I don't know where I am or what's going on.
All right. So, not having a goal, right? You get to her, and you could see that once you press the side, she's kind of crouching, like looking up at you, sort of, I'm assuming, unbelievably, right? Like, what are,
And she's already half lost it anyway.
Yeah, and there is a bleeding man at her feet. In dreads.
She grabs her arm and she says, and I'm like, help us. You can tell, like, she's really distraught. Like, this is an insane world that they're in. And what's her name? She says, help us. And she says, help me get him out of here. And that's what she says. Once I figure out that we're being hunted or something, whatever, she's got a plan. She's just...
And I say, you should know what's going on. Yeah, of course. If your friend is hurt, are the kids chasing after us, or are they still...
Right now, they seem to be... are you both going to look? I think you both heard and look. And you see the wax person getting torn to shreds by, like, paper cuts as these children are just, like slicing through them.
That worked. All right, let's get out of here.
She groans, like, and she's like, and then she starts dragging him, I guess, through towards the door, around the kids, away from the door that he came through, but towards the door that she came through earlier.
I'm following and trying to help.
Yeah, and there's only one door.
Oh, there's only one door?
There's only that one doorway. Yeah.
Okay. So so she's dragging him towards that.
Yeah, the two of you are carrying him now, right?
Yeah. And we're approaching these kids, and these kids didn't notice us. That's the point.
Let's do Jamie's action first. So, yeah, go ahead. And you have 3. You have 1 exhaustion, right? Again, it's kind of a crazy scene. So that, and then getting out of here with him is going to be 7.
Oh, God.
That's not good.
Nope.
All right, so pain dominates. However, 1, 2, 3 successes, which is pretty darn good. So pain dominates. Let's see here. So you guys get out successfully. The bats sort of join the fray. All the wax people run into the room and, like, at first trying to get their friend out. But then, the boys are, and now you guys notice that these boys are made out of paper. That they're made out of old, smeared newsprint. Wearing clothes. They are basically the fighting, like the two of them is like a weird little gang war. And the two groups are at this point fighting. And you guys there's a specific thing that happens if pain dominates. If pain dominates, you pay a greater price. Yeah, I sort of look at this as sort of a partial success. So basically what happens is the two of you get out onto the street, right? But your boyfriend is sort of like, grabbed and dragged back. And no one seems to be following you, but now you've climbed the ladder back into the street.
Okay.
And like looking around and doing.
That was a combination of spooky, eerie, dreamlike.
One thing I liked about it, I noticed, was that like it starts kind of like in the middle of where most stories start, where like usually you have that build up of some sort, and it's like you get to the point where you're sleep deprived and insane. Whereas this is like you're starting at the point.
Right. You are starting sleep deprived and
yeah. It's Fred Hicks and Evil Hat Games.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you want something that's very different, if you don't want a traditional horror, if you don't want a traditional, it's definitely a unique experience.
One of my favorite films, I don't know if it's like top 20 or whatever. I don't know how to rate such things, but Dark City. Oh, yeah. Dark City with Kiefer Sutherland, Rufus Sewell, and a host of other people, and Jennifer Connelly. It's really fantastic game, fantastic film, and it's very evocative of Don't Rest Your Head. It's definitely a cultural touch point for Don't Rest Your Head.
Yeah, and quite a few like sort of like mystical horror games, sort of, or like like sort of. It's kind of like The Matrix without the tech in a way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, what about you? What were the games that we've experienced?
I played them all.
I do. I love them all, and it's hard for me. It's one of the reasons why we sort of like all agreed to do this is because I am going through this process of selling all my games, and like all of this nostalgia is coming up, and I'm like, I love this game. Oh, I love this game. Oh, I love this game.
Yeah.
Of those, so I will say there's like a practical and an emotional response. The practical response is Blades. I mean, the practical response is John Harper just does such an amazing job at creating this system that's very accessible, but also like, so we were running Torchbearer for a while, and Blades in the Dark, even though it came after Torchbearer, it's sort of like, I'm not in his head, but how I felt was, it was like, let me show you how to play Torchbearer a little more accessibly, right? And he knocks it out of the park like he does every single game he's ever designed. And it's such a great combination of all of these story game mechanisms that he is just so good at combining.
I mean, honestly, it's the first time I played a really story-based system where I didn't feel somewhat hamstrung by the system, where it's like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I can't do that within this, and part of that is like sort of my own mental habits, probably from other games I've played, but like, I just really love the fact that it makes it so accessible without feeling like it's like stripping things down so much that it's like, there's two roles I can make or whatever.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because in the beginning, I think you feel it. I think in the beginning you'd be like, oh, wait, we're not doing all this planning and research. Right. Like, nope, you're starting right now. Go.
Right.
After a while, though,
we flash back and do the research then.
Yeah. After a while, you figure that out.
But in my head, by the way, it doesn't feel like we were, like the flashbacks felt natural. Like you said, there was this premise, it's go, and then, well, how do we get there? And then that seemed to be, I remember a conversation I was having with a lady who was, being abused by the vampire. And, that seemed very natural to the course of the game. It seems like a logical sequence for the game. So like, I'd love that.
And you discovering that, right?
Yep.
And that sort of point where you succeeded in a role, what does that mean?
Yep.
But I definitely have a soft spot. Mike Nistel is the designer of Whispering Vault. It's probably one of the oldest story games. Pariah Press. They've done a couple, I think Book of Haunts, if I remember correctly, and what was the other one? And I forget the name of the other one. That they produce, and a couple different companies did so. And I loved Nightbreed, and I think it was just there's so many really cool things you could do with a campaign of Whispering Vault. I think that's ultimately my even though I'll probably play more aspects of Blades in the Dark than any other game that we've talked about. That's definitely the one that, like, if I wanted to play a game, and now I incorporate ritual into a lot of those horror games and supernatural games.
Yeah. So, Jamie, you are into the game Chronicles of Darkness. So, what is it that attracts you to Chronicles of the Darkness so much?
So, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit during the episode when we did Chronicles of Darkness, but, I mean, for me, honestly, part of it is, accessibility of the system in terms of, like, not just familiarity, because I have that with D&D, but it hasn't become a default where I could play D&D for so long that I can just I know the damage of a broadsword, of a claymore or whatever. Like, it's just there. But, so it is useful to have that sort of familiarity, but also the system itself, at least the broad strokes of it. You're breaking like social, mental, physical. You have, 1 to 5 or over 5 if you're not, if you're superhuman, basically, stats, and you add those dots together, what your pool is. Sure. And like, even just with those parts of the system, you can do a whole lot. Like, you have that and you have resistive rolls. And so, like, a lot of times the way I play Chronicles of Darkness or run it is by having that and then adding on top of it systems that are specific to the setting that we're playing. Like, I've been running it a little bit differently for the Witch Hunters, like, dark fantasy game, as opposed to when I was doing Cyberpunk, like, they were kind of pulling in different parts of the system, other systems that seemed, useful. Like, when I was doing it for a Cyberpunk campaign, it's like basically the start of it was like, we want to play something kind of like Shadowrun, but the Shadowrun system is right, exactly. But the setting is great.
Sure.
And we're quite using their setting, but still is that sort of, like kind of idea of like a world. Basically, like the setup was like, it's actually, not a magical setting to start with, at least as far as what most people know. And you're kind of like living in the time of the awakening and the time of like, in Shadowrun when like people turned to elves and shit. Like, we didn't have elves because that seemed cheesy, but like, that sort of idea.
Right,
of,
sure.
The awakening happening during the actual course of the campaign. So, I mean, yeah, I think Chronicles of Darkness in that way, like, it is a traditional game in a lot of ways in terms of kind of how it thinks about like delineation between character and storyteller and so on. At the same time,
if you're going to approach it I'm hearing you and just listen. If you are going to come into RPG horror and you're looking at it for your first stab in the dark, Chronicles of Darkness or Blades in the Dark could be great options, right?
Yeah.
Blades in the Dark might be slightly more advanced because it's a little bit different, a little non-traditional in the structure.
I would say Blades in the Dark is more story oriented and Chronicles of Darkness is more character oriented, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Especially since Blades is really about the crew.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, Blades was really about your crew and your boss's crew and how you can bring anybody in, where you're right, like Chronicles, and Chronicles of Darkness and Storyteller System have these little bits of like, for Vampire it was humanity,
right?
And Rage for Werewolf. What do you use for Witch Hunter? Do you use any of that sort of stuff for Witch Hunter?
A bit. One thing I do use a lot is I have a ad hoc magic system that's actually been working very well, and it's driven by willpower. And so, like, one thing that's been really kind of cool with that is seeing, because willpower can just be used to add 3 dice to your pool. Yeah. And so it's something useful, for other characters. And also it ties into the virtue and vice system, because the way you refresh willpower is through virtue and vice, or by sleeping, but you only get one back.
Yeah.
So, it motivates players to try to find ways to connect with their virtue and vice, if they aren't already doing that naturally anyways. But there's a benefit of it is that the way I'm doing it is it is an overcasting system in the sense that, like, you can do a level 4 or rating 4 effect, even if you only have 1 dot in that thing. But you damn well better do good on that roll, because it can not only deplete your willpower a lot, depending on how many successes you get, but it can actually even deplete your health if it goes beyond your willpower. So that's, and there's been some cool effects of that, where there's like someone who one character who just started getting into a little light necromancy. And her character kind of vice and also her kind of concept is that she's like this very headstrong in terms of like, taking risks. So like right off the bat, she's like doing a level 3 effect, and she rolled okay on it, but like the outcome was that it still bit into the health. And so it's like, like you raising these sort of like zombie versions of ravens, and like blood starts coming out of her nose, and she turns gray. And like if she gotten a really bad roll, if you rolled ones on it, and had a critical failure, it would have been like then that allows me to take control, and the magic gets out of control, and then you can have like maybe it works, but those things are out of her control and start spreading.
Right. Wow, that's cool. Yeah,
that's cool.
That would be a really neat twist.
It's also like Chronicles of Darkness is really very versatile, and you could really get very crunchy with it. But there's a lot of like fun things. I don't know if you've started doing. One of the things I like about die pool systems is and we'll talk about this definitely at some point in time, is spending successes.
Yep.
And what you can do with that, can be a lot.
And also, like, a lot of times I'll use successes to determine things like that character, their original talent was in alchemy. And so, like, a lot of times she's like crafting alchemical things out of like, monsters they've defeated or whatever. Their bodies, like, the number of successes can determine the number of doses in that thing, or like it's like whatever specific to the task. It kind of gives you that added element of how successful you are.
With the spending piece, there's a fun decision-making tree where you could say, do you want to increase the number of doses? Do you want to create a new effect?
Right.
Do you want to do this story thing? Does your success at this indicate your group getting closer to a goal or stopping the villain from doing something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those wheels I was talking about.
Right, the wheels.
Yeah.
Do you want to do more damage, or do you want to move the wheel?
Right.
I think this is really fun.
Yeah. Well, we covered a lot of horror games. I think, of course, there's many more out there to explore.
What are we moving on to? What's next?
That's the question. Do you want to do sci-fi or do you want to do fantasy? I guess is the first question.
I think we were saying sci-fi or cyberpunk.
Well, this is a question, this is a discussion maybe, but like, I usually think of cyberpunk as a subcategory of
sci-fi. I don't.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Don't. It's interesting because I don't, and I think this is a difference in like how you think about these worlds. Sci-fi doesn't have a necessary dystopian edge to it.
Not necessary, no.
Right.
But
cyberpunk does.
Right, that's why I'm saying it's a subcategory.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. I think
and there are stories, because there's a noir element of cyberpunk, and this is why it's interesting. Like, is the Expanse a cyberpunk story? In some ways, you would say no, but it is definitely noir. Like, it has that fantasy noir element to it, and there are parts of it, like the Belter narratives and so on, do feel very cyberpunk in a way, even though they're in space. So other than that, like. But then like you have elements with like, the UN and stuff, and those characters who don't feel very cyberpunk. But so it is a very kind of nebulous thing in a way.
I think my problem is not problem, but I think cyberpunk to me, first off, is one of my favorite genres or subgenres, however you think about it. And I think sci-fi would be too restrictive for me. Like, it'd be too big.
There are a lot of games.
If we were including cyberpunk as part of sci-fi, then I have a list of games just for sci-fi.
Just for audience purposes, because I know some of them are thinking just like me. Well, wait, how many cyberpunk games do you know of that are RPG games? So
I had to narrow it down to 8 for the 8.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the 8? I mean, you don't have to name all 4, but like
Cthulhu Punk, Cyberspace. Obviously Shadowrun, although I don't think we were going to run it. Now Otherscape got added to that.
Otherscape, Cyberpunk 2020.
There's a game called Cyborg, which is part of the Morkborg group. There's and I could I had a whole list.
So I mean, it might make sense to break it off for that reason. My thing is just more, that I think of it generally as like a form of sci-fi.
I do think, though, we have a lot of people that would be interested in science fiction. So I think from anything from Star Trek to Aliens to, don't really want to go there, but Star Wars.
Do we want to talk about science fiction?
We could.
Let's talk about science fiction.
All right. We'll turn that out next then.
I think it might be a initially greatest interest to our to our
And there's
audience.
also Starfinder.
And don't get
Is
me wrong,
that too?
I love
It's like
Starfinder.
Pathfinder, but
Yep.
in space.
Yeah, I have a list of those because we will actually go a little into horror because one of the games that we did not talk about was Mothership.
And Coriolis.
Yeah.
And Coriolis. And Coriolis is actually my go-to horror game.
Right.
So I think talking about those two games, and especially since Free League does both Alien and Coriolis, which, you know, we play a lot. And then Mothership, I think those are definitely in the, you know, can be some of the early things that we play.
All right. Well, let's start with those. And then, yeah.
That's good.
Cool.
You have been listening to another episode of the Modern Mythology podcast. We hope we gave you something new to think about that you can bring to your RPGs, writing, and other character-based games and art forms. Produced by James Kershaw. Soundtrack by Scott Landis and James Kershaw. For more information about this episode, articles, or links to our other related projects, visit modernmythology.net.